All right, so we're going to dive right into our first question, and if we can get that up there. You, and I assume they mean you, Tim, made hell sound just like a metaphor, not a reality. So is hell real, and is there a judgment? What about the lake of fire in Revelation or the book of life? Metaphor or reality? So a big piece of your message today was talking about a lot of the descriptions of hell in the Bible being metaphorically, and this question is kind of getting the heart of, well, is hell a metaphor in and of itself, or is there a hell? So do you want to lead off, Tim, since it's kind of directed?
I'm glad to start. I think maybe just I'll take the last three words there, metaphor or reality, and I would just say yes. I think it's a false dichotomy to talk about either. And a lot of this, maybe this has to do with my own background as a student of Hebrew literature. So I've just been studying literature for like the past 6 years here, and reading in terms of poetry and metaphor and learning about how poetry works and so on.
But the reason I think that dichotomy exists is because the idea, if there's figures of speech, it's the misunderstanding of the use of the word literal.
Correct.
So that's
correct.
When people say, do you take the Bible literally, then they think then there's no metaphors. Or that's kind of what happens with this.
That's correct. Yeah, so to interpret if Jesus intends to use a metaphor, to interpret it literally is actually to misunderstand. It's not as if somehow these are two ways of thinking about reality or something. But metaphor is a way of talking about reality. And the biblical author, actually, most of our language is infused with
couched in metaphor. And sometimes you do a better job speaking about reality using metaphor.
That's right.
For example, today you could have read in the paper that the White House said such and such about the health care initiative. Really? We all understand what that means, right? The White House said. Because the White House is a metaphor for the administration. But we don't stop and think about it. You can communicate it very clearly by saying the White House said. Oh, if you take that literally, you mean that there is a house and it actually speaks. See, so when somebody says, oh, well, no, that's a metaphor. Oh, then that's not literally true. No, it is literally true that the White House said something. But metaphor can help you get to reality very quickly. So just because you use metaphor doesn't mean you don't take things literally. It's a misunderstanding of the word literal. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's metaphor all over the Bible, and sometimes it's the best way to communicate. And we do it all the time.
One of the things that we had a conversation in the car on the way home. We do this every Sunday after church. I have a 12-year-old in the back he's a male, and he's very literal about how we use language. My wife studies literature. She's using literary terms all the time. So in the conversation on the way home, when there was some concern about whether or not Tim was taking the sting out of the whole idea of hell by talking about it as metaphor, my 12-year-old in the back seat very helpfully reminded us, too, that our language about heaven is also metaphorical. Those are all word pictures. So
just let's play some of that out. So
pearly gates.
Or a golden cube.
Yes.
A golden cube city.
Streets of gold.
Totally. Yeah.
So, you don't believe the streets are actually being made of gold. You know, we'll think, well, now what would that actually mean? That means the things that we would put our feet on and we would walk on is gold. So gold will be as common there as dirt. That's kind of what that metaphor is about. That it's a place that's beyond our ability to comprehend how magnificent it is. But that doesn't mean it's not really a magnificent place. And that's the problem with metaphor for this subject, is that people are concerned that you're taking the hell out of hell. That's the issue.
Yeah. So I tried to be clear that I think the biblical author is trying to point us to a reality. It's the reality of human destiny, somehow apart from God. And the biblical authors use their whole literary toolbox to try and paint different aspects of what that is like. Fire, darkness. Jesus uses other metaphors. He quotes from poems in the book of Isaiah, about a worm that never dies. So we have this idea of a corpse rotting eternal disintegration.
I think you did a good job
So
in
on.
your message pointing out, like, how can you have literal fire and literal darkness at the same time? So that would get to
Correct.
a rub with that idea of literal.
Yeah.
But I think the use of the metaphors, what Tim's trying to communicate, I think, and you can speak for yourself, but we should not take any, it shouldn't relax us or anything.
Right.
It's horrible. Actually, these are great metaphors. Fire is horrible. No one enjoys. I mean, light a match and hold your hand. That's horrible. Darkness, utter darkness is horrible. So actually, the use of those metaphors by the Lord in the Bible, they're excellent metaphors for something that we don't want any part of. And that's what's going on, I think.
All right, let's move on. So, kind of in answer to this question, metaphor, reality, it's not either or, I hear you saying, but both.
Yes.
And the metaphors are a way of talking about reality and describing that reality. And as Chris just reiterated, and you said all day today, it may not be fire, but the fire suggests it's very, very serious, the ramifications.
Yes, and it's a real place. Judgment will be real. Heaven, like, heaven, where's heaven? Oh, up there. Well, see what we're doing right there. Well, like where? That kind of thing. So it's difficult to communicate in this kind of language and about these subjects without using metaphor. Probably impossible, actually.
All right, let's change gears a little bit, go to question 2. Under the assumption that God was and is all-knowing and all-powerful and just from beginning to end, why would God create a world knowing full well that some people would not choose him and would end up in hell? So I guess, this question is kind of getting the heart of the matter. Oh, what was that?
That was exciting.
Somebody whistled.
All right.
I think this question is getting the heart of the matter. Is it worth it? Kind of that point. Knowing full well that people end up there, was the creation even worth it? Some of the same questions that get at the root of the evil and suffering dilemma. So, who wants to take a stab at this?
They pay you the most, Chris. Why don't you give it a shot?
Oh, that's nice. Well, this is about, the question really is about the idea of, I don't know how to get to this simply. Why would an all-powerful, all-knowing, just God create a world knowing full well that the idea of love and the idea of freedom? That's the kind of this is the kind of the direction that theologians go behind the question of why is people suffer, why is there evil and things like this. So this has to do with God creating a world, and how could this be the best possible world if people are actually going to end up in separation from God? Because God created a world because he's a loving God. God created one of the worlds that God could create would have been a world where there are creatures who are free. And if creatures are free, then they can freely choose to move away from him and disagree with him and disobey. And he created that world because he's a loving God. And because he's a loving God, he cannot force people against their freedom, because that would be an unloving thing. Forced love is not a good thing. God's not a divine rapist. He doesn't force people to do what they do not want to do. And this is all set up because he's a loving God. So the question is really, is there such a thing as genuine freedom? So if you have freedom, why do you have freedom? Because God is a loving God, and he creates this situation where people can either turn toward him or turn against him. If they turn against him, it is against his nature to force them back, because he's a loving God. Does that make sense? I'm not probably approaching it as well as I could, but it's all about freedom. The fact that we have a loving God means that there's consequences to that, because then free creatures will choose to do whatever they want to do. They suffer the consequences of that. So it's an ancient way of approaching the subject. It goes back to Augustine and many other people. Does that make Somebody had to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I mean, the answer is love, right? And I read in a book one time, God kind of had 4 choices: to create no world, to create an amoral world where there's no good or no bad. That's kind of boring. To create a robotic world, or to create the world that we have here. And that's kind of the risk of love. And, I think the heart of the question is your dialogue with people about this is, okay, I get the risk of love. I get that we have a world in which true love exists and true freedom exists, but is it worth the evil and suffering? Is it worth people in hell? That's the heart question. And I think Tim went at that a little bit at the end of his message, saying, well, there's some mystery here that we don't, it's not over yet. We don't know everything. And I don't think that that's a cop-out. I think that's a good answer. Do you want to say anything about that? Are you getting where I'm going with that, Tim?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think I think this is one of the more profound things that a Christian worldview brings to the table, is that love, somehow love is at the, it's like sounding like a Beatles song, love is at the center of the universe or something like this, but that there is something so inherently good about the giving of oneself for the well-being of another, that there's something so beautiful and inherently morally good about that, that the possibility of that is worth the risk of love being missed or rejected in some way. Yeah. I guess that's how I kind of process it in terms of that.
Yeah, and there's the idea of him honoring us. He honors us by letting us be free and make decisions which are against his. He doesn't force us. He honors our freedom.
What seems to lie behind that question in part is to ask, how much freedom would you be willing to concede in order to have a universe without risk? And in order to have a universe without risk, it would mean essentially denying our humanity. Because at bottom, it's the capacity for freedom to freely choose and to freely reject that makes us ultimately what we are as humans. And I think for the Lord, in order to have the universe he really wanted, it had to be created with these kinds of conditions.
It's difficult. And there's another aspect of this too, if I'm reflecting on it, that a world with evil can be morally superior to a world without evil, because it's only against the backdrop of evil that good is good. You see, the diamond looks brighter when it's against a darker backdrop. So someone who is bravery is it's only a virtue if there's real fear behind it. So you're overcoming something. So a world that's filled with evil, and you don't choose that, but you choose the better, is actually a morally superior world than if there was no evil at all, because you're actually overcoming something, and most of us know that's virtuous.
Yeah, we've hit a lot of C.S. Lewis today, but he has a great quote, and he said, "What's more beautiful, a rock or a runaway horse?" I kind of think that's profound, and that's some of kind of what we're getting at poetically. The choice to choose and to fall in love is also the choice to go the other way and to reject. But in that, it's beautiful. It's much more beautiful into something that has no choice. So,
before you move on, John, one other thing that ought to be said too is that the glory of the gospel, the good news, presupposes that there is bad news. There is no one without the other.
All right, great. Moving along, question 3. If you believe that the people who choose hell and separation from God exist eternally, and their condition worsens as time goes on, are they burned up? Do they reach a point where they no longer exist? And this question is kind of using some of the imagery you used today, Tim, and it's going towards a classic position that many Christ followers hold biblically, that there will be people that go to hell, but eventually, or maybe right away when they're judged, they'll be annihilated, because that's the most merciful position. So we're kind of going with this question as to the eternality of hell. Who wants to tackle that?
Let me do that first, since I've dodged it so far. Let me just say this is sort of Tim and Chris will get into this a bit, I'm sure of it, but that is that the biblical witness isn't uniform on this. It doesn't speak with one voice. And so you will find passages that seem to lean in one direction, and you'll find other passages that seem to go in another. And so then we're left trying to make a best judgment as we can in terms of publicly what kind of a position do we teach. What is our theology of mission and evangelism predicated upon?
Yeah, and these are the kind of passages that kind of get in your craw a little bit, because I think all of us would like to I mean, maybe I don't speak for you guys, but I would much rather have some kind of a thing of, oh yeah, just zip out of existence. To me, that's I feel better about that. But there are verses in the Bible that just go, that's hard. My biblical exegesis won't allow that. They butt up against my desire for zipping out of existence, because you have these phrases that seem to imply that there is no rest, day and night, forever and ever, and those kind of things. So that's I don't know if we can pop some of those verses up. One of them is in Revelation 14:11. There's another verse in Revelation 20 and 19 and 20. There's a comparison. They're talking about the final destiny. It's all metaphor, but there seems to be that they're still there. So 14:11 talks about there is no rest, day and night, forever and ever, for these people who are suffering. And then you see that, is that up there, right there? Yeah. So that lends, so that's the idea of there's no rest. It's not, they don't just zip out of existence. And then in Revelation 19, now this gets into the apocalypse, and so it's kind of difficult, which is fodder for this argument, because it's all difficult in the apocalypse. But in 19:21, there's these two characters. There's a kind of an unholy trinity in the apocalypse. There is someone who is called the beast out of the sea, and there's a beast out of the earth. There's a false prophet, quote, like the Antichrist. There's two, and then there's Satan. So they make this unholy trinity kind of a thing. So two of the unholy trinity are thrown into the lake of fire in Revelation 19:20 and 21. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. So again, this is trying to describe in prophetic literature, the final destiny of all things. Because in chapter 20, you see that Hades is emptied into this kind of lake of fire. So there you get these two unholy people, and they're thrown alive into the lake of fire. And then in Revelation 20, verse 10, then the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They, that is the three of them, will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So you have these two who are thrown in, and then there's this issue about these 1,000 years, and then 1,000 years later, if that's literal, then you have Satan thrown in, and they are still there. So they're existing. So again, it lends support to the idea that there's no rest. It goes on forever and ever and ever, which is a horrible thought. I mean, obviously, I would rather it just zip out of existence. But there's difficult passages like this which don't tend to go that direction.
One question that rises for me when Chris was telling us that, and that's all there just as he said it, is that when you read apocalyptic literature like Revelation 20, it starts with, "Then I saw an angel." It comes in the form of a vision, a dream. There's a vision. How literal is that vision? What should we take away from that? And obviously it's an awful picture, but in terms of the details of the picture, how much of this is a literal description of the way things are actually going to go down? And it's a genre issue. How do you read this kind of literature? And that's where I think Tim might be actually more helpful in terms of replying to that specific passage. But there are other places too where Jesus uses that sort of thing, and he's not speaking in metaphor. For instance, in Matthew 25, when he gives us that picture of the sheep and the goats, if you remember, in terms of the picture of judgment, again, it's a picture, but he says at the end of that, in verse 46, or in 45, he will answer to those on one side, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." He's talking about feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, visiting those in prison, and so on. But he says in 46, "These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." Eternal punishment is mirrored by the opposite reality of eternal life. He's not speaking metaphorically there, it doesn't seem like. And that for some people is just a lockdown. What else is there to talk about?
Actually, if you go up to 41, the whole passage is a fantastic passage. I'll preach that passage. In 25:41, if you go there, so he's now saying to people who are going to end up there on the left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. And so on. And then that is the eternal punishment. It is that eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So it seems like, again, it goes on forever and ever, which is horrible.
Let me jump in here for a second. One quick announcement that I forgot to make. We're going to do it like we did it last week, and we want you guys texting right now. We want to honor the fact that you're live here, and if you can kind of text in response to what these guys have said so far, we're going to try to take the last 10, 15 minutes to deal with your text so we can kind of have an engaging conversation. So sorry that I forgot to say that, but we need you to text, and they'll get them up here to me. So back to the question. Just if I can direct you guys to just that last question. Do they reach a point where they no longer exist? And just be real simple for our audience here. Based on your biblical understandings, would you, all three of you, say no? Or would one of you say, I don't know? I mean, what would your answer to that question be, based on your understanding of Scripture?
Yes, I think they exist forever.
Okay. John, you concur?
I love being smoked out like that. Publicly, I wouldn't. If I'm in a teaching position, I would say yes, they exist forever. That we are eternal beings, we're resurrected, and we go to our judgment. Privately, I hope for something different. But saying it privately in a group of 200 people is not terribly private. So
we would want the latter.
Yeah, I would want the latter.
Yes, I would.
Privately,
too.
I hope for it, but I don't. But the biblical material seems to suggest otherwise, and that's what I would teach.
So Tim, you've been conspicuously silent here. Do you want to mix it up a little bit and throw an alternative view out there?
I'll put at least some other pieces of this discussion on the table. So there's two issues. One is we have biblical passages, and you have the ones that we just looked at that use this word eternal. You also have passages that use various images related to destruction. So Paul the Apostle particularly uses words connected to images of destruction. And so this has led some theologians to this position that what's eternal in the passages we just looked at is the consequences. But in terms of the existence of someone who's chosen a destiny apart from God, that it's actually destruction, like to cease to exist at some point. And there's also a theological or philosophical reason behind this. And I think it'd be interesting to put on the table. It's a position called conditional immortality. And the basic idea is that the vision of humanity, kind of given in the stories in the early Genesis and in the garden, is that it's not that humans are immortal in and of themselves. This is how the position goes. Humans are not immortal in and of themselves. It's actually God giving us life that enables anyone to live forever. And so when someone is withdrawn from God's presence or apart that ability to be immortal no longer exists. And so these individuals will cease to exist. And so there's kind of two, usually people who hold that position have this view of conditional immortality, based also connected with interpretation of certain biblical passages. So kind of personally where I'm at, I think is something similar. Obviously the destruction passages are in the text, but there are these handful of very clear passages that seem to speak of some kind of ongoing existence that doesn't cease. And so, it's one of those things where when you have. It's not like all the biblical authors sat down and said, let's all agree about every point of our theology. It's not always their purpose sometimes.
I think what makes it more difficult is so many of these are in Revelation.
That's correct.
And that makes it even more difficult because of the nature of that literature. So it's difficult. There's another verse in Revelation 22, 14 and 15 that seems to go kind of a contrast. Blessed are those who wash their robes that they may have the right to the tree of life, may go through the gates of the city. Mm-hmm. Outside are the dogs, those who practice magic arts, sexually immoral, murderers, adulterers, everyone who loves and practices falsehood. So it seems like, again, there's like these two existences and they kind of coexist at the same time. And again, there's this problem with the kind of literature and what's actually taking place. So that's why I think you have some of the theologians that hold to annihilationism. They are evangelical, solid, great. John Stott is one of them. I put his book up last week on homosexuality. So he would probably be one of the most famous on this whole idea of annihilationism.
Yeah, that isn't that a great name for a theological position? So
Annihilationism.
Annihilationism.
So I hear all three of you kind of saying the same thing. To the best of your knowledge, the weight of Scripture seems to suggest that separation from God is eternal, but we hope not. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Let's move on to a new subject and get that question up there. Once someone chooses hell, can they ever choose to leave? What about purgatory? What's Blackhawk's position on purgatory? So we know many people come to Blackhawk that have come from traditions that teach purgatory. We want to be super respectful of those. I think a lot of times evangelicals who have grown up with no teaching on purgatory just think it's some kind of far-fetched, ridiculous thing. And I think if you study history, you'll see that's not quite the case. That these positions are somewhat well thought out and came from history and from study of Scripture. So kind of one of you can speak and give Blackhawk's position on purgatory, but I think the more broader question is, what do you think about purgatory, or the idea of kind of once we die physically here on earth, that it may not be over as far as our decision-making process regarding who God is and what he's done for us. I think that's the heart of the question.
This gets into a lot of difficult things in theology. It gets into the canon of Scripture, what is the Bible and what is not the Bible, because purgatory doesn't occur in the Bibles that you have right there in your seats, but people in the Roman Catholic tradition have a little thicker Bible than we have, so it gets into that issue. Also gets into the issue of atoning for sin, because I think this is the Reformation kind of comes down to this idea of what is justification by faith. Can people who die, can they do something to atone for their sin? Or can you pray for someone who's actually died? So it gets into that, and then it gets into the idea of where are they, is there a place? So theologically, a lot of things kind of come to a head here in the issue of purgatory. So I just set it up. You guys can answer it.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of just thinking about where we've been as a series, the issue of the atonement is a pretty,
it's a good place
pretty
to go.
significant one. And so the idea is that if essentially the idea of purgatory is that hell or whatever that separation from God is a refining purgative type of experience. And so what's bad or evil or whatever does not want to be with God in you is left behind, or using the fire imagery of burned away, as it were, making you fit for presence with God. And so there's just a lot of pieces of that just don't jar with even just the basis of the gospel that we were kind of portraying, that it's not on the basis of anything going on inside of us that we are fit to be in the presence of God. It's only because of what Christ accomplished for us. And so to insinuate that we can somehow work off some of the bad stuff to finally be in God's presence, in my mind, kind of undermines the very basis of the story of the gospel as we were trying to think about it.
I think that's probably the best thing for, as a Christ follower, I would want to just forget anything about what a passage in the Apocrypha says or something like that, and just stay with atonement. Mm-hmm. The issue is, can we do anything to atone for our own sins? And I think the Bible would say, no, we cannot. Only Christ can do that. So, and his work is fully satisfying to God. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that we can do that, I'm trusting in what Christ has done on the cross. That's not enough. I also must do some things. Wow, that's serious right there. That the work of Christ on the cross was not sufficient to satisfy the Father. That's a big deal right there, I would say. The Bible does not teach that. The Bible teaches it was completely enough, completely satisfactory, and we can rest in his work.
So would you guys go the same route, a little bit of a follow-up in praying for people that have died? Would your question kind of be the same. It's a little bit of a offshoot, but I think it's tied to the same thing. Someone that we love is passed on, and we're not sure. And man, we want hope, right? I mean, that's what we want. And what would you say about kind of quickly about praying for people that have died?
I'm talking too much. Somebody else.
Well, in my own case, my first wife died in 2003. So pretty regularly, I ask God to communicate to her. I don't know how the metaphysics of this works, but I just say, Lord, please tell her that we're doing well. Tell her that her son is doing great. That kind of thing. So there's a way in which I am asking him to communicate for her, since I don't have access to her. But I'm also, have prayed for her, and I've also prayed for lots of my family members who died, and I had no idea actually I had some idea where they were with Christ. And so to this day, I continue to pray for them. God, please do by them exactly the right thing, which I know you will do. And it's really more of me trying to come to grips with, they may be subject to judgment, and I really don't know. But I do pray for them. And if God is not subject to time in the way that we are subject to time, it doesn't seem to me that it really matters all that much whether it's before the fact, during the fact, or after the fact in terms of when those prayers are offered. And in his economy and in his view of time, it may not matter. I don't know. But for me personally, that is just something I do, not because I anticipate changing God's mind about my grandpa, who I love dearly, but who rejected him. I'm not trying to change God's mind, but rather, please God, do by him exactly the right thing.
Right. Yeah. What you're trying to do then is just you're grieving the loss of Deb, your wife, and your first wife, and so you're just going through grief of what's happening. But there's no change of state for someone who's died. Once you've died, your state is set. There's a verse, Hebrews 9:27 would be a good verse to pop up. That's kind of the teaching of the Bible, so that it's set. But that doesn't mean we can't pray for and thank God for people who've died. And obviously, I think what you just shared about Deb, I would probably do the same thing, Hopefully, because again, it's a veil. We have no idea. We're talking about things that are beyond our ability to comprehend. And what's going on in Deb's world right now and that kind of thing. Yeah,
That's right.
It's hard.
That's right.
Cool. Thanks, John, for sharing that. So kind of back to purgatory, I think I heard from all of you guys, as purgatory comes up, maybe you come from a tradition that you've believed that or kind of been puzzled by it. Maybe you've come from the other side where you've always thought it was kind of an odd belief system. But I think these guys all went to not the canon necessarily, but to the atonement. The idea of purgatory suggests perhaps that Christ's atonement wasn't enough, or that we have something to do with our salvation. And so you get into a prickly situation there theologically. So good answers. Let's kind of, you want to, go ahead.
And this is actually a question to Tim and to Chris, and that is when you get to 1 Corinthians 3, there seems to be a judgment involved there that isn't the final judgment, the Matthew 25 sheep and goats thing, but rather a judgment with respect to the kind of life we've lived. And in terms of what is it that gets burned away. And that's the purgative thing that Tim was talking about, that fire not only destroys, it also purifies. And so in 1 Corinthians 3, we do have a picture that Paul uses to talk about what's going to happen with us in terms of the things that we have done for the kingdom of God along the way. So I was wondering if you guys could speak to that in terms of, there does seem to be a refining fire judgment in terms of our life.
Sure.
Chris has been speaking way too much, Tim. So
Yes.
why don't you step in?
You haven't spoken at all today. You should start speaking.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So if there is one passage in Scripture that's sometimes used as sort of like a starting point for a view of purgatory, this is that passage. Though I don't think that it's actually teaching that. So Paul is talking about how he founded the Corinthian church. And he's talking about the worthwhile effort of his work there. And he talks about, according to the grace of God, like a master builder, I laid a foundation, he's using metaphor, building metaphor, to talk about how he planted the church there and his work. And someone else is now building on it. There are other people now who go and are leading the church there. Each builder i.e. each leader in the church, must choose with care about how to build the mission of a community. No one can lay a foundation other than that has been laid. The foundation is Jesus Christ. And then these are the key verses here in 12 and following. If anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, the work of each builder will become visible, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed with fire, and fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If what has been built on the foundation survives, the builder will receive reward. If work is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. The builder will be saved, but only as through fire. But it's important to recognize what is being tested by fire is not like the person. What is being tested is the worthwhile effort of someone's work. So basically what this comes down to, at least in my estimation, is that with our lives, we're doing something. We're building things. And the in terms of meaning, purpose, whether we're doing it for God, out of love and passion for God, these kinds of things, this would be like an analogy, that, the day of justice will weigh according to what we've done, what's been done from right heart and right motivation and for God, and what has not. And
that's exactly it.
So it's not a person being evaluated. It's talking about someone's life accomplishments.
Right. Scan down to 4:4. In 4:4, my conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait till the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. At that time, each will receive his praise from God. That's what the passage is about.
So, there's actually something sometimes that does come up, though. The fact that we're accepted by God because of Christ's death and through grace doesn't mean that our lives are not going to be evaluated.
Exactly.
And that we're responsible as Christ followers for the decisions that we make. Mm-hmm. And whatever form that will take, there will be an evaluation of our lives. And that's not a contradiction of grace.
And that is a major theme in the Bible about judging according to works, which, again, our salvation is not based on works, but what happens, rewards, how we please him, those are all based on works and things like that. Major theme in the Bible.
Okay. Let's move on to a new topic. This one will take us a while probably to tackle. Tim said Jesus died on the cross for our sins and experienced hell for us. If hell is separation from God and Jesus is God, was Jesus separated from himself? It's a nice little cute wordplay there. But I think the heart of it is kind of what happened to Jesus, as he descended, that kind of whole deal. So jump on in, boys.
Very first response, there's a major problem in just the statement there in terms of Orthodox Christian belief, and it's this sentence right here. I'll use capital letters. How about that? At least according to traditional Orthodox Christianity, this is radical heresy.
Jesus.
Where's the heresy? Yeah, this is a seminary prophet kind of. The heresy is in the period. Jesus is not God. Jesus is God and human. And so the Trinity figures into this conception here, is that we have Father and Son and Spirit. And what does Jesus say on the cross? He quotes Psalm 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is somehow the Father and the Son being separated. Yeah, okay. Now who's going to come up here and really explain the Trinity for us all? You know what I'm saying? So this is in my mind, this is at the heart of the mystery of God's threeness and oneness, in that Jesus as the Son is separated from the Father, from the community of the Trinity in this kind of moment. And no biblical author explores this theme. The only hint we get of it is in the crucifixion narratives themselves of what Jesus is experiencing. No other biblical author delves into what happened. But it's the Trinity that's at the heart of this vision of God suffering for us, but one of the persons of the Trinity suffering for
Yes.
us. So that's kind of a short answer. We can explore it more if you like.
Well, if we explore the Trinity, we'll be here all night, right?
Yeah, true.
I don't think we have time for that. One clarifying thing, Tim, you're not saying Jesus isn't fully God with that statement.
That's correct. What I'm saying is when we use this sentence a lot, especially in evangelical traditions, because we want to emphasize this point. Mm-hmm. But what's incorrect about this is ending the statement before we add "and human." The Father is God, Jesus is God and human. And that's part of just Orthodox Christianity. That's a part of the...
So it's absolutely unique. I sometimes say, borrowing from a former professor of mine, is one who with two whats. So he has a human nature and a divine nature, but he's one who. Everyone you've ever run into is one who with one what. You know, who am I? I'm Chris, and I'm a human being. Jesus was different from all of us. He had two natures, so it makes him completely unique. So it's very mysterious what is happening on the cross, what is really taking place. That's really, really hard.
We all sit around for fun at seminary and talk about these things. We're kind of dorks.
It's a great question.
Well, but I mean, this is really a core element of our confession.
It's the heart.
It's what makes the Christian God unique, really, over against other claims, is that God is three in one.
Well, one of the things that Tim said is that it's part of our confession. And one of the things, if you grew up in a liturgical church, you do confess. You know, Jesus, on the third day, he descended into hell. On the third day, he rose again from the dead. So I'm wondering if the question doesn't get at that reality. What happened there?
Apostles' Creed.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, we were having the wrong conversation.
No, I think you guys got to the heart of the question, but I was going to follow it up with that probably more interesting question. And if you want the cool theological term of this, I think it's referred to as the hypostatic union.
Yeah, that's a good
isn't
one.
it?
Yeah.
Hypostatic.
Another dorky thing. But anyway, let's get to, I think, what a lot of people ask and may not be all that important, but is really interesting. When Jesus died on the cross, what's so funny?
There you go.
Sorry.
Yes. Wow.
I like that.
Has that worked for you, actually?
Okay, anyway, sorry.
So that's good. Did he descend into hell?
Yeah. So when Jesus died on the
Creed.
cross, where did he go? What happened to him physically, spiritually, that kind of deal? And again, we're running a little short on time. I don't want to spend the rest of the night on this, but just kind of a succinct answer. What do you guys think? I mean, there's a lot of differences of opinion among scholars on this. Where do you guys land on this question?
Well, I think the work was finished on the cross. So when he said, "It is finished," Father now, he says to his Father, what is it? "I commend my spirit to you," that the work is over. So the darkness starts happening at about noon, and it goes till 3 p.m. And it is during that darkness that he is paying for the sins of all mankind. He cries out one of his last cries, says, "Why have you forsaken?" So he's experiencing at that moment separation from God, whatever that means. But then it's over. And at that point, he does not descend into hell or anything like that, even though the Apostles' Creed says that, but there's kind of a long history about that. So that's my view about what's taking place on the cross. It's over. The work is complete on the cross.
What's the biblical evidence, Chris, where it says that Jesus ministered to those?
1 Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
well, I
bringing
guess
that
I want to be
verse in.
sensitive to the time issue if we have some
Yeah,
other
touch on that, because I think
questions.
that verse comes up a lot when people, they don't know what to do with that.
Yeah,
So.
got it. Yeah.
Wow, that's a hard passage.
3?
1 Peter 3 and 4.
Yeah. I don't
3:19
remember
around
what
there.
Verse, yeah. One of the best commentaries I ever read on this section said, "This is bar none one of the most difficult passages in Scripture to understand." So whenever you hear that, it's just always good to hold lightly what's going on here. But there's this idea of Christ suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison. and it goes on to talk about the people in the times of Noah. And so the question is, what is this talking about? And if you read the passage in context, it just doesn't help at all. It just doesn't help at all. And so this is the only biblical passage where the tradition of Jesus descending into hell for some reason is built off of. But
it's important enough that the early church included it as part of their foundational confession. So it's a one reference, but in terms of for whatever reasons that we're not going to get into tonight, it's critical.
I think, I don't know a lot about the Apostles' Creed, but it did evolve over time. It was 200 or 300 years in the making. So it wasn't like the Nicene Creed or the Chalcedonian Creed that just came as a result of the council. So, and that's where really this phrase comes from. That is a difficult passage, and I don't know if it merits a more attention or not, but it's hard.
All right, let's go to, I think, one final question here, and then we'll take some from the crowd that have been coming in tonight. Can we go to the one before that? I think we skipped over one. No?
No, we haven't skipped one. I don't think so.
I have a number 6. And I think that's a more interesting question, so I'm going to ask that. If,
right.
If hell separation from God is the end result of a life's worth of choices, how do deathbed conversions fit into this? And so, sorry, we must not have that typed up there. But I think that's an interesting question because that was something you were moving towards today, Tim, as far as hell being the culmination of a life lived apart from God. And we all hear these stories, and they're, thank you. We all hear these stories, and they're awesome stories. You know, we tell them, right? And we rally around them. You know, somebody that's just, you know, I always hear the story about Jeffrey Dahmer. That's one you hear all the time. And I don't know how factual it is. James Dobson was involved somehow, but I don't know. But the story goes that in jail, before he was murdered in jail, that he converted to Christ and he became a Christian. And that's something that we always use it as Christians as a story of grace and awesome. But I think this person's kind of throwing it up there today, kind of where you were going, Tim, with like, what's up with that? You know, the trajectory changed there right at the end.
The biblical example is a thief on the cross.
Yeah. So go with that a little bit. I think people are kind of going at the fairness of it a little bit.
Maybe I'll address that, and then I know I think one or either of the two of you have actually been at someone's deathbed conversion, so you probably have something more important to say. But maybe just to clarify, what I was not trying to say, and I hope I didn't come across as saying this, as God honoring this lifetime trajectory of choices means that there's something inevitable or impossible about making a different kind of choice, you know. I mean, I don't think it was impossible for the wealthy man when he was alive to have made a different kind of choice. I mean, that's the point of the gospel, is that we can actually respond and make a different kind of choice in a response to God's grace. And so what I'm really working at with this end trajectory of life choices, what I'm trying to make clear there is that hell is not, at least in the parable as Jesus developed it, it's not some surprise. Like, oh, this is, you know, the man's going down kicking and screaming into his fate. No, it's a natural consequence of his life trajectory. But it doesn't mean that was impossible to...
Can I just intersect? Because this is one of the questions that came live from tonight, and it goes right with what you're talking about.
Okay,
so I don't want to ruin your chain of thought, but I think this will be helpful for you to address this. If hell is a culmination of a lifetime of bad choices, then logically, heaven is a culmination of a lifetime of good choices. So what if you're somewhere in the middle, as most people probably are? How does God's judgment apply to them?
Yeah, got it. Well, I would say the logic, you could say logically, those are two parallels. But I mean, the whole point is that the only thing that gets us on the right track is not something that we have done. And to me, that's the point of the gospel, is that my life choices will inevitably take me down a certain path apart from God's grace.
There's an overestimation of the human in that question, that goodness, and an underestimation of sin. That's what's going on there. The comprehension of what it really means that we are sinful, how dark our sin is. That's what's going on there. So the questioner is, the issue is, no, we are, if sin was blue, we would be blue all over. So that is what separates us from God. And even if someone is making good choices all the time, they still have sinned. That's the issue. I think, behind that.
Yeah, and so maybe this issue of somewhere in the middle, what about people who don't seem, or I don't feel like I'm choosing hell and on this trajectory? And I think that's probably where most human beings lie. Most human beings are not as horrible as we could be. Some are, but most of us aren't. And so this is where, at the end, I just said, I'm not a pastor, I'm just Tim. I'm not God. And God knows our hearts, and he will do what's right and what's fair. What I'm trying to work at is theologically explaining that hell in this parable is not some surprise twist at the end of his life. It really was theologically the end result of his life choices. It wasn't like God pulled a bait and switch or something like that. But when it gets to the details of like our lives, that's where I just step back and say, I'm not the judge of people's hearts. God will judge us fairly and justly according to where we're at. So I appreciate the question. I know this is a question that comes up when this view. If you're interested, the pieces of the puzzle I was putting together today, C.S. Lewis, in The Great Divorce that I put up there, explores this. Basically, I think it's almost the parable of Luke 16 turned into a novel, is what he's exploring. If you're interested in a little more theological exploration of what I was putting forward today, Michael Murray, in The Reason for the Hope.
Yes, something
Reasons
like
for
that.
the hope within.
Reason to believe, something like that.
Reason for the hope within, or something.
Yeah, Reasons for the Hope Within.
Here we go. Reason for the Hope Within. This is just a great book for I think for any Christ follower. It's tackling some of the most practical, tough. It's basically a whole book on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's really a pretty meaty treatment. A lot of these questions, and Michael Murray, the editor, has a whole chapter on heaven and hell in there. He explores really well the ideas that I was kind of putting out.
I think another good suggestion for books, having a good theology, a good text on theology in your home would be a great addition to your home library also. So there's a guy named Wayne Grudem. He has several theologies. There's one's real thin and then a little thicker and then real thick. So one of Grudem's theologies might be good. Millard Erickson's theology. Anything like that, a one-volume theology, they will deal with these kind of questions that are thrown out. So it's a good addition to your library.
All right, let's move on real quick. We only got a couple more minutes here, and this question is kind of maybe a pop culture question. Whenever you see in movies or novels, whatever, as hell is depicted, this is probably one of the things that it includes, but it also has some biblical background to it. Where do you guys see demons fitting into the discussion of hell? Demons, real quick. Demons in 2 minutes.
Demons in 2 minutes. Well, my quick answer would be just in terms of biblical passages. Again, the only biblical passages that involve other spiritual forces at work in depictions of this final destiny apart from God are in the book of Revelation, where you have forces of evil pitted against forces of good in God's people and so on. I guess I can't off the top of my hand, I can't think of any biblical passage where you actually have something like the Sistine Chapel, an image of demons tormenting humans, or
that
taking
they would
them,
be actively involved.
or
Is
the
that what you're asking?
hauling them off into hell. That's just not at all in the Bible.
No, they are also destroyed in that Matthew 25 passage we put up into the fire prepared for the devil and his angels, or something like that.
Out of just to be fair to Dante, one of the things I was wondering about during Tim's sermon was like, well, actually, those images are there, but they become too vivid and concrete and canonical for us in terms of, and then the images just sort of derail our biblical reading. So, but to be fair to Dante, those things are in there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, but I would even say just the image of fire and darkness is very different than drawing a human with half of their bones being vaporized off as they descend into a pit. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so in my mind, that just really is a misuse of the Bible.
Yes.
That's dangerous.
He was a
poet,
Tim.
Yeah.
He was a poet.
I don't know. I don't know. So I just have an aversion towards
Artist, you know? Jeez.
Yeah, well,
Artistic license, I think that's what they're saying.
All right, so here's a question that I don't think some of you up there, but I hear this a lot in ministry, and just wanted to get your quick take, and then we'll kind of close here. So Tim, you've said this a lot. I think all of you concur. Kind of a good basic definition of hell is separation from God by kind of our own choice. But if people are separated from God, isn't God also omnipresent? And how does God's presence interact in the eternal sense with hell, wherever that might be? I've heard that question a lot through the years, and just interested if you guys had a take on that.
Let me derail the questions momentarily and give Tim and Chris a chance to reply to that. But my son was asking me about that today in the car. It seems like a bloodless sort of picture of hell. It's a separation. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. Until we start thinking about one of the worst things you can do to a human being in prison is put them in solitary. You put them in solitary, you deny them access to blue skies, sunshine, trees. All they have access to is themselves. They are separated away from the rest of human contact. They have the means of life only in so much as that they have access to food, and that's it. That is one of the worst things that you can put a person through. And so, in talking about just separation from God, is that really a punishment? Yeah, that would be awful. It would be completely awful to be separated from everything else that makes us uniquely human. What an awful existence.
Probably separation from the aspects of his presence. Again, it's a really difficult issue. Because God, everything exists. God cannot be, God, since he is present everywhere, it's very difficult because it gets into the idea of our understanding of space and time. And then we launch that onto a God, like the way he relates to space and time is the same as ours. So it just really gets into this whole thing of, he's here and not someplace else. So it's really an aspect of his presence, as he's, obviously there's aspects of his goodness and wonder and grace that people experiencing separation from him would not be able to experience. I don't know, beauty or the whole idea that we can enjoy that kind of thing. There's no enjoyment apart from him. And somehow it's going to be an eternally unenjoyable kind of a thing. He's the one that brings joy, and they'll be apart from him. But when you get into spatial things, that's when you get into difficulty.
Okay. So we're kind of drawing to a close here, and this is kind of as we've done each week, this is the rubber meets the road portion of our forum, and just kind of speaking to the heart, and I'm asking you guys to kind of speak succinctly. I mean, most of our conversations happen in like 2 minutes or less in passing, right? And so, in case people got lost here tonight and weren't following all the time, I just kind of want to bring it home with two kind of questions. And I'll ask one, get your responses, and then end with the second one. The first one is in relation to Christ followers. Many people here tonight are Christ followers, and all of us are tripped up and dread this subject when it comes up. Hell, oh no, I just don't even want to talk about that. How do I get out of this conversation? That's why we picked it, kind of duh, right? It's a rotten tomato. Just as succinctly as you can say, kind of from your pastor's hearts, and you're giving these people who are kind of out there in the world, a lot of times we aren't as much, and they're having these conversations over coffee or with their relatives at Thanksgiving, and and it comes up. What would your advice be to them? Dodge it, stay away from it, because again, it's going to be a quick conversation, right? It's not going to be a 3-hour conversation. It'll be a quick conversation. What would your advice be to Christ followers and how they approach this subject with people who are not Christ followers?
Well, I mean, I think Tim did a good job today, because I think there'll be ridicule. Isn't that ridiculous? That kind of thing. So I think if you can have a conversation that helps people think about the fact that it is a reality, but those could be metaphors for something that's really horrible, and the idea of what does it mean to be human, and some of those. And that's not a short conversation over a Thanksgiving meal, but that's the kind of thing you might want to go in that direction. I think that can actually help. They probably have not heard that kind of representation of hell before.
This will sound a little unrealistic, but I've actually been able to do this more than once. And that is, if the person is really sincere in their questions, I would start where Tim did and say that the mental images that we have are way too colored, either by Dante's the first and second, third, fourth circles of hell, that kind of thing. Would you like to get into Scripture? I'll bring along a Bible to work, And would you like to look at those passages? And if they're really serious about it, I've had people bite on that and say, yeah, I would actually. I really would like to look at those. And so this has happened in a work situation. He used to work for the USDA. And so Scott and I did that. And he loved it. He also really wanted to know the pictures of heaven. Those also are pictures. Can we look at those? And yeah, let's do. So depending on the seriousness of the question, somebody might actually take you up on it.
I would take a bit of a different tack, or I'll just bring a different angle on this. And this is actually how I began the message, or kind of my first thought was this issue of justice. And I find this to be very, very helpful. I think particularly, I'm not sure if this is generational or something, but maybe just because of globalization and our ability to find out about so much of the injustice going on in our world through modern media. But most people, you start talking about a longing for justice, a longing for us to be held, for somebody to be held accountable for everything that's gone wrong with the world. I personally find that to be a really fruitful entry into conversations about final justice and human destiny. And at the end of the day, most of us really do want people to be held accountable for the moral decisions that we make. And that's why I made that little joke. That is, as long as it involves other people getting justice, because that's where the rub comes for us. But I've found that you can build common ground with people, that our moral decisions matter. And we need to take that seriously. Evil really does exist. And any worldview that, in my mind, doesn't address the problem of evil and bringing justice to evil, in my mind, is a deficient worldview. It ignores the gravity of evil and injustice in our world. And in my mind, that's just an open door to start talking about things about the gospel, but move towards this issue of justice, and that we really do long for justice.
All right, last question again, and I think is we've all been there, at least I know we have, and many in the audience, and kind of switching roles here, saying, but you're there, you've got a friend, let's propose to this, a good friend of yours, you've known them for a long time, they know where you stand, and they're not a Christ follower, but they're a really good person, probably a way better person than you are. And they come up, and maybe they have tears in their eyes, and you're one-on-one with them, and they look you in the eye, and they say, John, Chris, Tim, you really believe I'm going to hell? Really? Mm-hmm. And I think at that moment, at least when I've been in those first couple words, and where we go with that is super important. Where would you guys go with that? Because you probably have a couple sentences, just a minute or two to kind of start out on the right foot with that person. Where would you guys take that as that's happened to you in the past, and where would you advise us to go?
I have had that question put to me, and sometimes by people who do have tears in their eyes, sometimes tears of frustration, and sometimes tears of anger. And I tell them, I don't know. I don't know. That's only God can tell you that. One of the things I have done, and it's been helpful to create some space, is taken to Matthew 25, that passage about the sheep and the goats, and I tell them that one of the things that we can have a great deal of confidence in is on that day of judgment there will be surprises. There will be people who were sure that they were a goat who end up being counted as a sheep. And there will be some people who were sure, absolutely, positively, I am a sheep, who will turn out to be a goat. And so in creating some space for that person, I'd say, where do you think you fall into this? And why? And so, again, getting out of the picture of hell and judgment, getting to the place of what kind of life are you living? And where is your life going? And that's where I began.
I stole my thunder. I was really just going to say the exact same thing, and that's why I really highlighted at the end that it's not our prerogative to make declarations about where people are going. In my mind, it's much more fruitful to just talk about our lives, and talk about life together with people. And so, in the past, and thinking about conversations, I just try and move towards where are you at right now? I mean, sometimes it's someone who just doesn't believe in God, period. At which case, let's not be talking about heaven and hell. Let's talk about the point at issue, about the existence of God. That's really where the fruitful conversation. So I guess I move away and want to help someone maybe meet a Christian who's not making just offhand declarations about whether they're going to hell or not, and just engage in relationship and talking about life together.
Yeah, because I think the person is sincere about the fact that somehow you're doubting their goodness. That's where that's really going, most likely. That you're not honoring them in your religious tradition. You don't recognize that I'm a good person. And so you want to get away from that pretty quickly and say, you're great. It has nothing to do with that. So then it moves towards maybe a serious conversation about compelling questions. I always say there's just a few compelling questions. Does God exist? Has he revealed himself? Is this the revelation of himself? And so somehow that would move into that. But if somebody has a tear in their eye about this issue, or they feel like it might, you better have a tear in your eye too, because we don't know what we're talking about here. None of the three of us, we don't know what we're talking about here. This is a very weighty issue. And if we don't have concern and compassion so however that conversation turns, that person should not walk away with this idea that that you as a Christ follower think you're better than them or something. That's really what's going on in that person's mind. And they can't walk away from that conversation thinking that you think you're better than them or you don't care for them. Because somehow you've got to turn the conversation to a fact that we're all on the same playing field, and I love you. You're probably a much better person than I am. So get away from the idea that we don't think they're a good person and move towards other issues. I know that might not be helpful, but...
No, that's great stuff. John, we just want to thank you for being here tonight. I know you're out there. You've had so many of these conversations, got tons of wisdom, and we're just grateful for you being here. And Tim, a special thanks to you. I thought you did a fabulous job with a tough subject today, and I know it's a long day. And so can we just give it up for our panel?